She used him, betrayed him, and built an empire on his back, then tossed him aside like he meant nothing. Miriam Caldwell thought she had won it all. But years later, at a powerful investor's will reading, a single name shattered her world: Daniel Cross. The ex-husband she destroyed is now her new boss. What happens when revenge is silent, strategic, and absolutely devastating? The fog clung to the cobblestone streets of Prague like a shroud, softening the edges of the Gothic spires piercing the night sky. Miriam Caldwell stood on the balcony of her penthouse suite in the Old Town, her sharp gray eyes scanning the Vltava River below. At 42, she was a vision of calculated elegance, blonde hair pulled into a tight chignon, a tailored black coat hugging her frame. She'd built an empire out of betrayal, and tonight, she was supposed to celebrate her latest triumph, a merger that would cement her tech conglomerate, Calcross Innovations, as a titan in Europe's burgeoning digital market. But the champagne flute in her hand trembled slightly. She wasn't alone anymore. It had been 3 hours since the reading of Gustav Reinhardt's will. The legendary German venture capitalist had died 2 weeks ago, leaving behind a fortune and a bombshell. Miriam had expected a generous bequest. After all, Gustav had been one of her earliest backers, a man she'd charmed with her ruthless ambition. Instead, the executor's dry voice had delivered a gut punch. Gustav had transferred his controlling shares of Cal Cross, 51% of the company she'd bled for, to Daniel Cross, her ex-husband, the man she'd erased. Daniel. The name alone sent a shiver down her spine, not out of fear but fury. She'd met him 15 years ago in London, a shy, brilliant software engineer with skin the color of rich espresso and a mind that could unravel code like poetry. She, a white South African émigré with a chip on her shoulder, saw in him a ticket to Silicon Valley. Their marriage had been her ladder, his talent, her cunning. Together, they'd founded Cal Cross in California. He built the groundbreaking AI platform. She worked the rooms, shook the hands, and, when the time was right, cut him out. A forged signature here, a whispered rumor there, and Daniel was gone, left penniless and disgraced while she rebranded the company as her own. Now he was back, and he owned her world. The door to the suite clicked open behind her. Miriam didn't turn, but her grip tightened on the glass. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed on the hardwood floor. She knew who it was before he spoke. "Beautiful view," Daniel said, his voice low and smooth, carrying the faint British lilt she'd once found charming. "Prague suits you, cold, unforgiving." She turned, her face a mask of composure. He stood in the doorway, taller than she remembered, his once lanky frame filled out with quiet strength. His dark eyes glittered with something dangerous. Intelligence, yes, but also a fire she hadn't seen before. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, the top button undone. In his hand he held a slim folder. "Daniel," she said, her tone clipped. "I'd say it's a surprise, but I suppose Gustav's little gift ruined that." He smiled, a thin, sharp thing. "Gustav always had a sense of justice. I guess he saw through you before I did." Miriam set the champagne down on the railing, crossing her arms. "What do you want? Money? Revenge? You've got the shares. Congratulations. But don't think for a second you can run my company." "Your company?" He stepped closer, the folder tapping against his thigh. "That's the story you've told yourself, isn't it? That it's yours because you stole it. Because you convinced everyone, me included, that a black man couldn't possibly be the brains behind Calcross. Too risky for investors, you said. Too unconventional. Her lips thinned. Don't play the race card with me, Daniel. This was never about that. It was about survival. You were weak. I wasn't. He laughed, a sound that cut through the room like glass. Weak? I built the damn thing, Miriam. Every line of code, every algorithm, my weak hands did that. You just knew how to sell it, and how to lie. She bristled, but he wasn't wrong. Back then, Silicon Valley had been a white boys' club, and she'd used that to her advantage. Daniel's brilliance had been undeniable, but she'd seen the hesitance in investors' eyes, the subtle recoiling when he pitched, so she'd stepped in, the polished face they could trust, and slowly edged him out. It wasn't personal, at least, not at first. It was business. Now, though, it felt personal. She gestured to the folder. What's that? Your victory speech? He opened it, sliding a single sheet across the table between them. It's a summons. I'm calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Here, in Prague. With Gustav's shares, I control the vote, and I intend to use it. Her stomach dropped. She snatched the paper, scanning the legal jargon. He wasn't bluffing. You think the board will just bow to you? After all these years? They'll bow to the numbers, he said, and to the truth. I've spent the last decade rebuilding Miriam. I've got evidence, emails, contracts, even the original code timestamps. You rewrote history, but you didn't erase it. She stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't the Daniel she'd known, the quiet dreamer who'd crumbled under her betrayal. This was a man forged in fire, patient and lethal, and he was here to take everything. The air in the penthouse thickened, the silence between them heavy with unspoken history. Miriam dropped the summons back onto the table, her fingers curling into fists. Evidence, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. You think a few old emails will undo 15 years of my work? I've got lawyers, Daniel, armies of them. They'll bury you. Daniel didn't flinch. He leaned against the doorframe, casual yet commanding, like a predator sizing up prey. You've always been good at burying things. Me, the truth, hell, even your own conscience. But this time, you're not fighting some naive kid who trusted you. I've learned the game, Miriam, and I'm better at it now. She stepped toward him, closing the distance, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Better? You've been hiding in the shadows for a decade while I turned Cal Cross into a global name. What have you been doing? Tinkering in some basement? Nursing your grudges? Something like that, he said, unfazed. But I wasn't alone. Gustav saw what you did to me. He tracked me down 5 years ago in Berlin. Offered me a chance to start over. I built a new AI, better than anything Calcross has now. He funded it, kept it quiet. And when he saw how you'd twisted his legacy, he decided to give me the keys to yours. Miriam's jaw tightened. Gustav Reinhardt had been a mentor of sorts, a grizzled old man with a soft spot for underdogs. She'd always assumed his faith in her was unshakable. Her charm had ensured that. But now she saw it. He'd been playing a long game too, waiting for the right moment to strike back, and Daniel was his weapon. You're delusional if you think this changes anything, she snapped. The board won't care about your sob story. They'll see a ghost from the past, trying to claw his way back. They'll laugh you out of the room. Maybe, he conceded, straightening up. But they won't laugh at the data. Your latest merger? The one you've been touting as your big win? It's a house of cards. Overvalued assets, cooked books. I've got the proof. You've been cutting corners, Miriam, and it's about to catch up with you. Her breath hitched, just for a moment, before she masked it with a scoff. He couldn't know that. She'd been meticulous, paying off auditors, burying discrepancies, but Daniel's eyes held a certainty that unnerved her. He'd always had a knack for seeing through the noise, finding the flaws. It's what had made him invaluable and dangerous. Before she could respond, he turned toward the door. See you at the meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., Hotel Europa. Don't be late. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the summons and a rising tide of dread. The next morning, Prague buzzed with its usual rhythm. Tourists snapping photos of the Charles Bridge, trams clattering through the streets. But inside the gilded conference room of the Hotel Europa, the atmosphere was electric. The Calcross board sat around a long mahogany table, a mix of European elites and American transplants, their faces a gallery of curiosity and unease. Miriam stood at the head, her posture impeccable, radiating control despite the sleepless night she'd spent poring over financials and plotting counterattacks. Daniel entered last, flanked by a wiry man in a gray suit, his lawyer, no doubt. He carried a laptop and that same folder, his presence drawing every eye. Whispers rippled through the room. Most of them hadn't seen him in years. To them, he was a footnote, a rumor. Now, he was a threat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Miriam began, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "I assume you've all received Mr. Cross's unexpected summons. Let's not waste time. He claims ownership of Gustav Reinhardt's shares, a move I intend to contest legally. This meeting is a formality, a stunt. I urge you to dismiss it and move on." Daniel set his laptop on the table, opening it with a calm that grated on her nerves. A stunt? I'd call it a reckoning. Gustav's will is airtight, Miriam. The shares are mine. But I'm not here to beg for your approval. I'm here to show you what's really at stake. He clicked a key, and the projector flared to life. A spreadsheet filled the screen, numbers, dates, transactions. The room went silent as he walked them through it. Inflated revenue reports, hidden losses, a shell company siphoning funds. Miriam's merger, her crown jewel, was a fraud. Gasps punctuated the air. She felt the board's eyes boring into her, their trust unraveling. "This is nonsense," she said, her voice steady despite the heat creeping up her neck. "Fabricated data from a desperate man. You can't trust him." "Funny," Daniel replied. "That's what you said about me back in Silicon Valley. Too risky, too unproven. But the truth is, you didn't trust me because I didn't fit the mold. A black engineer leading a tech giant? You couldn't sell that to your golf club buddies, so you sold me out instead." The room shifted uncomfortably. Racism wasn't a word thrown around lightly here, but it hung in the air nonetheless, a quiet, persistent specter. Miriam saw it in their glances. The older German exec who'd once asked Daniel to tone down his accent, the French woman who'd praised Miriam's relatability in pitches. It wasn't blatant, not anymore, but it was there, baked into the system they all navigated. She seized the opening. "You're reaching, Daniel. This isn't about race, it's about competence. You couldn't handle the pressure then, and you're proving it now with this circus." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Competence? I built Calcross. You stole it, and now you're running it into the ground. The board can decide who's competent." The vote was called. Miriam's allies rallied, but the numbers didn't lie. With Gustav's shares, Daniel held the majority. One by one, hands rose in his favor. She watched her empire slip away, her throat tight with rage and something else, fear. When it was over, Daniel stood. "I'm not here to destroy Calcross," he said, addressing the room. "I'm here to fix it. Miriam stays on, for now, but I'm taking the reins." She stared at him, stunned. He wasn't firing her. He was keeping her close. Why? As the board filed out, he leaned in, his voice a whisper. "You're not done yet, Miriam. But you're going to learn what it's like to fight from the bottom, just like I did." The days after the board meeting blurred into a storm of activity. Prague's gray skies mirrored the tension at Calcross's European headquarters, a sleek glass tower overlooking the city's historic heart. Daniel moved in like a quiet conqueror, his presence reshaping the company floor by floor. Engineers who'd once dismissed him as a relic now scrambled to impress him, awed by the AI prototype he unveiled. A system so advanced it made Miriam's latest projects look like relics themselves. The board buzzed with cautious optimism. The stock ticked upward. He was proving his worth, and it burned her to watch. Miriam, relegated to a corner office, felt the walls closing in. She still held her title, Chief Strategy Officer, but it was a hollow shell. Daniel chaired the meetings now, his voice steady as he dismantled her merger, exposing its flaws to the public with surgical precision. The press ate it up. Tech prodigy reclaims empire from ex-wife's grasp. She was painted as the villain, the ruthless opportunist undone by her own greed. And yet, he hadn't fired her. That gnawed at her more than the loss of control. What was he playing at? She got her answer on a rainy Thursday, 3 weeks later. He summoned her to the top-floor boardroom, a space she'd once ruled. When she entered, he stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city's spires, glistening under the downpour. The room was empty save for them. "Sit," he said, not turning around. "I'll stand," she replied, her tone icy. "What's this about, Daniel? You've won. Rubbing it in feels beneath you." He turned then, his expression unreadable. "It's not about winning. It's about finishing what we started. Together." She blinked, caught off guard. "Together? You can't be serious." "I am." He crossed to the table, pulling out a chair for himself, and sitting with a casual ease that infuriated her. "You're a shark, Miriam, always have been. I hate you for what you did. But I can't deny you're good at what you do, when you're not lying through your teeth. I need that." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You need me? After everything? You're either a fool or a masochist." "Neither," he said. "I'm practical. Calcross is bigger than us now. Thousands of jobs, billions in play. I can rebuild the tech, but I can't navigate the politics alone. You can. So here's the deal. You stay, you work for me, and we turn this ship around. Or you walk, and I let the world pick apart what's left of your reputation." Her mind raced. He was offering her a lifeline. Humiliating, yes, but a chance to claw back some dignity. Yet it meant swallowing her pride, bowing to the man she'd crushed. She hated him for it, but she hated losing more. "Why not just kick me out?" she asked, searching his face. "You've got the power. Why keep me around?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his dark eyes locking with hers. "Because I'm not you. I don't destroy people to feel big. And because I know what it's like to be written off, to have the world assume you don't belong. You did that to me, used every stereotype in the book to justify it. But I'm not here to play that game. I'm here to prove it wrong." The words hit her like a slap. She'd never admitted it aloud, not even to herself. But he was right. Back in Silicon Valley, she'd leaned into the biases, his race, his quiet demeanor, the way he didn't fit the brash tech bro mold. It had been easier to sell herself as the face of Calcross, to let the whispers of, "he's not leadership material," do the dirty work. She'd told herself it was strategy, not prejudice. But staring at him now, she saw the lie for what it was. "And if I say no?" she asked, her voice quieter. "Then you're free," he said simply. "But the board knows everything. The fraud, the cover-ups, it's all documented. You'll spend the next decade in court, and you won't win." Checkmate. She sat at last, her hands folding tightly in her lap. "Fine, I'll stay. But don't expect me to grovel." "I don't," he said. "I expect you to work. Starting tomorrow, we meet with the EU regulators. They're sniffing around the merger fallout. You're going to charm them like you charmed Gustav. Only this time, it's my playbook." She nodded, the bitter taste of defeat mingling with a flicker of grudging respect. He'd outmaneuvered her, not with malice, but with something stronger: patience, principle, and a vision she'd never had. Months passed. Calcross stabilized under Daniel's leadership, its reputation slowly recovering. Miriam played her part, her sharp tongue and sharper mind smoothing over scandals, winning back skeptical partners. They weren't friends. Too much history lay between them, but a fragile truce took root. She watched him in meetings, commanding the room with a quiet authority she'd once mocked, and wondered how she'd missed it all those years ago. One evening, as they reviewed contracts in his office, she broke the silence. "Why didn't you ruin me, Daniel? You could have." He looked up from his laptop, considering her. "Because I saw what ruining you did to me. It doesn't fix anything. It just keeps the cycle going. Someone's always the villain. Someone's always the victim. I'd rather build something better." She didn't reply, but his words lingered. The world outside kept turning, its biases and battles unchanged. Racism still simmered. In boardrooms, in headlines, in the sidelong glances Daniel sometimes caught, but never acknowledged. Yet here they were, two broken pieces of a shattered past, piecing something new together. When she left that night, Prague's streets were quiet, the fog curling around her like a question. She could stay, fight alongside him, maybe even redeem a sliver of what she'd lost. Or she could walk away, start over, let the chips fall. For the first time in years, Miriam didn't know the answer. And somehow, that felt like freedom.